We are recording, and I'd love to ask you to begin for us by sharing with us a little bit about your background, and then I know you've prepared some materials to do some text study. So if you want to roll into that, in whichever way you want to start, if you want to start with the text study first, whichever way you want is fine with us.
Okay, Boker Tov.
Boker Or.
Let's start with the text study.
Perfect.
Okay. So I titled it, Why Do We Fast? And want to ask the question, what are the different natures, what are the different ideas around the different fast days on the Jewish calendar, and talk about how we can gain insight into why we fast by looking at what happens to these fast days when they fall on Shabbat. That can inform how we think about these fast days. So if we begin with Yom Kippur, the Torah tells us on Yom Kippur, well, v'hayta lechem lechukat olam b'chodesh hashvi'i b'asor lechodesh ta'anu et nafshotechem v'chol melacha lo ta'asu hazrach ve'ager hagar b'tochechem. So the Torah tells us to practice self-denial, this idiom, inui nefesh, to practice self-denial and not to do any work. And then the text tells us the purpose of this fast. It's functional. Ki vayom hazeh yechaper aleichem letaher etchem mikol chatotechem lifnei Hashem titharu. So it has the purpose of helping us to gain atonement from God and to be purified. And the Torah also tells us that Yom Kippur is Shabbat Shabbaton. So if Yom Kippur falls on Shabbat, we don't move the day, right? We keep it on Shabbat. And that makes me think that there's something about the fast on Yom Kippur beyond its functionality, that the mood of the fast is one of anticipatory joy. The feeling that I might have if I were running a marathon and I was sure that I was going to cross the finish line. This anticipation of being granted atonement and purification. And it would be strange to move the fast, especially because the Torah tells us that Yom Kippur is Shabbat Shabbaton. So we leave it on Shabbat. If we think about Tisha B'Av, if Tisha B'Av falls on a Saturday, we move the fast, because it is a fast of mourning, what the Gemara refers to as Avelut Yeshena, a memorial mourning, as opposed to Avelut Chadasha, mourning for the death of a loved one, a family member. So since it is this memorial of mourning, we don't want to do that on Shabbat. Shabbat is a day of joy. So we move it a day later. We're certainly in no hurry to experience that kind of mourning. And the Shulchan Aruch tells us, Im chal Tisha B'Av b'Shabbat, kind of in parentheses, we move it to Sunday, mutar b'kulan afilu b'tashmish amita. So on the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, we don't diminish our Shabbat in any way. The Ramah argues a little bit differentiating between public signs of mourning and private, but according to the Shulchan Aruch, we don't change our Shabbat. We don't even have the Suda Mafseket before Tisha B'Av. We enjoy Shabbat, and we move our very sad day of mourning to Sunday. But if we look at Ta'anit Esther, it's very different kind of fast. It's not a law, it's a custom. So that's one difference. It's from dawn to dusk. But I think even more importantly, if Ta'anit Esther were to fall on Shabbat, right, if Purim were on Sunday and Ta'anit Esther would then fall on Shabbat, we don't leave it on Shabbat like Yom Kippur. We don't push it later like Tisha B'Av. We make it earlier. So if it's supposed to be on Shabbat, we also don't do it on Friday. Presumably that would somehow impair our preparation for Shabbat. So we actually fast on Thursday. And my teacher, Rabbi David Silber from Drisha Institute in New York, he looks at the Megillah, at the end of the Megillah, to try and figure out what is this fast of Esther really about. And he spends a lot of time on it, but I'll speak a little more quickly to say that the fast of Esther, in a plain sense, it wouldn't make sense to do it after Purim because it's very much connected to the lead up to Purim and the story of Purim, leaving aside whether it actually happened or not. It just wouldn't make sense to do it after. But what is this fast that we're doing before Purim? So he looks at Megillat Esther, chapter 9, verse 17 and 18. In those verses, he reads how Purim, the victory of the Jews in the Purim story, was celebrated with Mishteh v'simcha on the day that they rested, right? They fought on the 13th, rested on the 14th in Shushan a day later. And he focuses on those words, Mishteh v'simcha, and he talks about how that's really a Persian way of celebrating. And then in verse 19, Al Kain HaYehudim HaPrazim, the Jews that were spread out in all the villages, HaYoshvim Ba'arei Prazot, Osim et Yom Arba'a Asar L'Chodesh Adar, Simcha u'Mishteh, and then it gets added, the Yom Tov, it becomes this good day, not so much in a rabbinic sense of Yom Tov, but a happy day. Mishloach manot ish l're'ehu. Adds on to the Persian kind of Mishteh v'simcha, this idea of Yom Tov and Mishloach manot. And then we have Mordechai, who writes the letter. V'yishlach sfarim, I'm in the next verse, al kol ha'yudim asher b'chol medinot ha'melech Achashverosh, ha'krovim v'ha'rechokim, l'kayem alehem liot osim et yom arba'a asar l'chodesh adar, v'et yom chamisha asar bo b'chol shana v'shana, ki yamim asher nachu v'hem ha'yehudim me oivehem. I'm going to go to the end of the verse where he says it's going to be l'simcha, u'me'ever l'yom tov, so we have the Yom Tov, la'asot otam yemei mishteh v'simcha, u'mishloach manot ish l're'ehu, u'matanot le'evyonim. He adds, Mordechai adds onto the holiday that we're going to give to the poor also, and the text tells us that the Jews accepted this. So just a few more thoughts about the Megillah, and then I'll conclude with thoughts about the fast. So in chapter 10, then Esther writes this sefer, this igeret that goes out to all the Jews. And in verse 31, Lamed Aleph, L'kayem et yimei Purim ha'ele bizmanehem kasher kiyam alehem Mordechai ha'Yehudi ve'Esther ha'malka ve'kasher kimu al nafsham al zaram divrei hatzomot v'za'akatam. So going back to, it's a day of remembering fasting and crying out. So all of these layers to the celebration of Purim, what is the fast of Esther really about? I would say, rather than being functional like Yom Kippur and a memorial grieving like Tisha B'Av, this fast of Esther is really the anticipation of redemption. It's the anticipation of redemption in the Purim story, but also the anticipation of redemption in today's world, because our tradition teaches us that Amalek rears his head in every generation. So the fast has within it fear, but also joy in knowing that we're going to celebrate not only in the Persian way of Mishteh v'simcha, but also in a very Jewish way of Mishloach manot and matanot le'evyonim.
Really fascinating. Thank you. That was a great. For me, it was a new way of looking at the text, so I really appreciated it. So share a little about yourself with us.
Okay. Excuse me. I am a third generation Chicago Reform Jew, although in some ways I consider myself a conservative Jew and a Reform rabbi, which I can speak more about. but you can kind of imagine the layers of that identity. I grew up at B'nai Joshua Beth Elohim, which is something that I'm proud of. My rabbi was Rabbi Mark Shapiro, who is also my cousin and a very important mentor and someone who has had really a profound influence on myself as a person and my rabbinate. I spent about 16 summers at Olin Sang Ruby Union Institute in Econo-Walk as a camper and a counselor and a song leader and a unit head and a rabbi. Other than my synagogue, definitely the place where I learned how to pray and developed a relationship with God and came to, I think, a very deep understanding and grateful, joyful understanding of Jewish community. I graduated from Cornell University with a degree in Near Eastern Studies and Government and HUC-JIR in New York City. I also studied at Hebrew University, took classes at NYU when I was at HUC, studied at the Drisha Institute, and one summer at the Hartman Institute. And I mention all of those places because thinking about the Chicago Board of Rabbis, I think one of the reasons that I would be a good fit is that I've always really pushed myself to take extra classes and immerse myself in communities beyond my own, beyond what I grew up with, beyond even my own comfort level, to really learn from different kinds of teachers and different communities. And I've really retained friendships and teachers from all of those experiences. Should I tell you a little bit about my jobs up to this point?
Sure.
That part of background, okay. So I'll quickly tell you some of the major takeaways from the positions that I've held up to this point. I was at CJHS for 6 years. It's now Rochelle Zell. And really it felt like another 6 years of rabbinical school, I will say. It took a lot of studying to teach what I was teaching. And I really focused on design thinking, on starting with an assessment and working backwards. Curriculum development became a main focus of my time there. But also in terms of the community, I really saw myself as an advocate and a support to students who came to CJHS from public school. I kind of became a touch point for those students, and I think an advocate in terms of what the curriculum offered them and how to help them acclimate to a school that was very different from what they had come from, in terms of prayer, in terms of Hebrew. So that was CJHS. CJDS, I was at for 7 years. I taught in the middle school. And I think what I learned the most from CJDS is how a very strong vision gets translated into every aspect of an institution. I really learned that from the head of school, Judy Taff. Big picture. And then what I focused the most on in terms of teaching was learning about different learning styles and differentiation. And really becoming, I think, a touch point for students who needed some extra help. So that was CJDS. I was the rabbi in Michigan City. It was part-time and I traveled there. But I never liked to call myself the part-time rabbi to them because they didn't need a part-time rabbi, they needed a rabbi. And what I learned in Michigan City was how special small-town Jewish life is, and how to think about translating some of those blessings of small-town life to larger communities, larger synagogues, larger cities, and also how much I have to learn from clergy of other faiths. I was the only rabbi in town, and my friends were, two of my closest friends were the Presbyterian minister and the Muslim imam, with whom I worked on several different projects. I've been at Interfaith Family now for about 1.5 years. It has pushed my boundaries in many ways. Talked about this a bit with Rabbi Siegel. I have seen it as, I've come to understand it as shlichut. I really see it as shlichut. I have in ways found myself living in a world that feels so different from the world that I've grown up in and worked in. But I feel proud of doing that kind of shlichut and really reaching out to people who are some, not all, but some really on the fringes of the Jewish community, and trying to figure out what doors are open to them and how to enter them with integrity and dignity. And I think the biggest takeaway has been really learning how complicated interfaith work is and delicate, how long-term it is. It's also exposed me to my own biases and my blind spots. And I think it has helped me become someone who can help other rabbis think about working with interfaith couples in ways that can retain our own boundaries and integrity and also respect theirs. So that's bringing you up to today.
It's fantastic. You had mentioned about how a vision is translated into the importance of having a strong vision and translating that into an institutional framework. Do you have a sense of what vision you might have for the Chicago Board of Rabbis, as well as do you have a personal vision for yourself? What sort of goals you might have for both the CBR as well as perhaps for yourself over the next 5 to 10 years?
An evolving vision, I would say. Certainly to continue providing opportunities for my colleagues to do meaningful Torah study. Each other, by each other, I think would be really wonderful to learn from each other. Also to continue the work of Rabbi Belinsky of bringing scholars in to teach us. To continue the interfaith work that people in the position have spent time on. I think the other part of the vision is for rabbis to come together to really share best practices, to learn from each other, to talk about our challenges and our struggles. Sid, you were at the meeting last week, starting to talk about B'nai Mitzvah and the challenges that all of us face with that. I thought it was a really important conversation. I thought it was really the tip, very, very tip of the iceberg. And so I would love to see rabbis have a chance to come together and talk about the very real challenges and opportunities that, that we all face, whether we're in a congregational setting or not. And some of the really big issues that are facing the Jewish community and how rabbis can think long-term and really strategize together about how we can engage more people in Jewish life. I think there was so much wisdom around that table, and we really only touched, I think the very beginning of that conversation.
Yeah, so we were both at that, and what struck me was that I felt as well that it was one of the most important conversations I've been at in a couple of years. And what struck me was that there were very, very few of the community congregational rabbis who were present. And so I guess what I would translate that to is how might you work to advertise, communicate with clergy, with the members of the CBR when such a program is going to happen, to be able to highlight it in their busy schedule, right? Is there technology you might use, or how might you draw in the people who would most benefit from that kind of a program?
That's a challenge for sure. So Interfaith Family, you might know, I'm a one woman show, and I've had to really think about marketing and communication more than I have previously. I would personally invite people, especially, I think I have a list in my head of rabbis that I have not seen at Chicago Board of Rabbis meetings, men and women, but I don't know any non-binary rabbis in the area. There might be, but I think There are a lot of women who have not traditionally, historically been at that meeting that I have deep friendships with that I would invite. Think I would ask people to prepare something, right? You give someone a task, they're more likely to come. Think if people feel that their voice is going to be heard, not only heard, but that we really need their voice. That we present the program in a way that it's going to be partly presentation, but mostly conversation, I hope would be compelling to people. And also to say, if you can't make it, that you could join on Zoom, that you could join on the phone, that we'll record it. And I mean, this might be challenging if the same people aren't at the meeting, but maybe we would say for this part of the year, maybe for several months, maybe for 6 months, our topic is going to be B'nai Mitzvah. And so the conversation is going to be ongoing, and you can listen to the recording. You can chime in to me via email or phone, and I can share your thoughts. So I think there are ways that I could help people's voices be heard even if they couldn't be present. That might be through conversations through me. So all of those ways, and I recognize that that's a really challenging part of the job. But that's how I would work on it.
Okay. Tell us a little about your organizational style. You've had a lot of different kinds of jobs, experiences, and so how do you keep on track with everything?
So how do I keep myself organized, and how do I organize my time? I'm very visual, so I have a kind of template that I've developed, a to-do list template that I divide into the different tasks that I need to do. And then in terms of time, I block out time every day for phone calls, for emails, and then if there's something that takes a few hours, which I hope that there is, right? I don't want to spend my whole day on emails and phone calls. If there's something that I really need to prepare for, that I need to study, that I need to write, then I block out time on my calendar. I keep notes on all the couples that I'm working with, so that I've learned in the past couple of years that my memory is not what I want it to be. It's okay, but it's not what I want it to be. So I keep notes on all the couples. I keep notes for every life cycle event so that I can go back to them. And yeah, and then I've learned to ask for help when I need it. So I've never had an assistant the way it sounds like Rabbi Belinsky has had an assistant. That was quite exciting. But so I'm very visual. I create these templates. I look at them every day, and I look at my time, and I organize my day accordingly.
Fantastic. So Israel is probably like intermarriage, and Israel is a contentious issue in our community. And the CBR has dealt with some issues in the recent past. So just as a case study type thing, how would you handle contentious Israel issues within the context of the CBR?
You mentioned that question to me when we spoke, and it's very challenging. I would do my best to provide a forum where everyone's voices could be heard, whether we agree with them or not, whether they really push our buttons and push our boundaries or not. There's a kind of a list of expectations of conversation that IFF uses. And I don't have it in front of me, but it's assume
IFF is,
IFF is interfaith family.
Oh,
interfaith family, right? So assume good intent, listen with resilience, speak in the first person, things like that make listening and conversation a little more peaceful, perhaps. I would want all voices to be heard. I would want to bring in, I think, scholars that could help us clarify the issues. At the end of the day, I guess it would be ideal and maybe naive to say that we could agree to disagree, because I know, I know there was a specific incidence where people couldn't do that. I guess that happens more often. I would see my role as being one of conversation facilitator and hopeful that everyone's voices, again, could be heard. I think things in Israel are, well, you all know, they're super complicated. I think, events even within the last week have been very upsetting, certainly to me. But I also think, we have to think about beyond our own personal opinions about Israel and politics. I think there's a conversation, a larger conversation, maybe a more important conversation to be had about how we teach Israel, how we speak about Israel to our congregations, how we engage the community in having a relationship with this very complicated country. And so how do we teach about Israel in a way that's not just about politics? How do we teach all of the beautiful things about Israel and the challenging things too? Yeah, I hope that touches on the question.
Yeah, I think you touched on a number of points. So you've had communal leadership positions in the past. Tell us a little bit challenges and successes of handling the communal leadership position that you've had already.
Sure. In Michigan City, so I guess the challenge of Michigan City is that I didn't live there. And I really see the role of a rabbi as being someone who is involved in the community beyond the Jewish community. So I really did my best to do that in ways that I could, getting to know other clergy and planning events with them and learning about Michigan City. I did at times go into the schools and talk about, different holidays. More than that, though, I helped other parents do that. So there were ways that I, had to kind of help grow ambassadors to the Jewish community there, which I really enjoyed doing, and I think ultimately is the way to go anyway, because it shouldn't just be the rabbi. I will say that people in the congregation told me that they felt that I really unified the congregation, that before I came, I guess there had been some, for lack of a better word, kind of cliques of people that had lived there forever, people that had come into town, people of different socioeconomic levels, and that people felt like I didn't see that, and I didn't see it, and I really didn't. And that I had a way of relating to everyone and of really unifying the congregation. And I really appreciated that feedback. I'm proud of that feedback. With Interfaith Family, it's been really exciting and so interesting for me to partner with other organizations like One Table and Honeymoon Israel, and to move beyond kind of my experience that was very synagogue, day school, and camp based, and learn about these other innovative programs and become someone more out in the community and connected to all the different ways that I think we're trying to engage people. The challenge of IFF is that it's not a community, and we really struggle with, are we trying to build community, or are we trying to really guide people towards established communities? And we've really decided the latter. And so that's a challenge, because I want to develop long-term relationships with people and be with them on their journeys, long-term. But my job is really to connect them with more established institutions, Chicago institutions that they can, that can offer them more than Interfaith Family can. So that's been a challenge for me personally, because I like long-term relationships.
Right. A lot of what I was hearing you say is your talk was more about the personal connections that you've been able to foster and build within communities. And so perhaps on a more of an organizational level, so is in the work with CBR, representing the Chicago Jewish, community, the rabbinic community, within other organizations, how do you see doing that kind of aspect as opposed to on the personal level and more on the organizational?
Can you tell me a little bit more about what the goals of those organizations are?
Well, yeah, I guess one area I'd be thinking about is, the Christian-Jewish dialogue. It's more on the larger basis, and interfaith work, not person to person, but
right.
more organization, that kind of.
Right. So the word interfaith, I think interfaith means one thing to the Jewish community. It means something else to other people, certainly when it comes to working with interfaith couples. But if you're talking about the kind of interfaith work similar to what I did in Michigan City of building really partnerships with other congregations, with other communities, I see that as really exciting work, and being an ambassador for the Jewish community, being someone who can help educate people of other faiths about Judaism, about the ways in which we're similar, about the ways in which we're different, but mostly about, I think, the ways that we are all trying to make the world a more just place. That to me is certainly a place of great overlap between religions. And so I'm not exactly sure what interfaith organizations I would be a part of, but if it had to do with advocacy, or if it had to do with education, if it had to do with getting communities together in service projects, all of that would require, I understand what you're saying, not as much personal relationship building, although it would with the other clergy, but more kind of organizing those kinds of events, thinking about what the takeaways would be for people who attended those events, and I think also trying to understand what people want when they come to an event like that. I will say just quickly that I really learned in my interfaith work in Michigan City how much people really wanted to learn about the similarities and differences. The first few programs that we planned were kind of like very feel good. We can all get together and do service, which was important and fruitful. But as we got to know each other better, we were able to really talk about our deeper questions about each other. And that took a while, but I think we arrived in a very deep place.
Thanks. So you have, throughout your career, had a great deal of experience with teaching younger people and mentoring. Can you share some of those experiences? And part of this role, as you know, is working with Federation and working with some of the younger Jewish professionals there. How would you foresee yourself interacting in those kinds of situations?
That part of the role really excites me. I taught 6th grade for 7 years. That was hard. These young people would not be 6th graders, which is fantastic. I see myself as someone who's really ready to mentor young Jewish professionals who are looking to learn more about Judaism, to explore their own path, to talk about their families, their relationships, how they want to raise their kids. And what I understood from talking to Rabbi Aaron and to David Rubovitz was that many of these young people are really looking for their own personal engagement and enrichment Jewishly, and that could also help ramp up the Jewish content of the programs that Federation is offering. So I think my ability to mentor them personally and also help them think in terms of education and programs, that I have the skills to link those two.
Fantastic. So this is sort of a little bit of a wrap-up question. I'm also going to ask you if there are questions, things that you'd like to address, and the committee if there are things that they specifically heard missing that they would like you to talk about in our remaining 10 minutes. But so what drives your interest in this particular position?
What drives my interest is, part of what drives my interest is that my understanding of the position, how it kind of evolved, was that it was the result of some pragmatism of needing both roles to be filled, and that it works to put them together. But I actually really see a natural bridge between them, in that I think the rabbis could be very helpful in thinking about how we engage people in the Jewish community in our own institutions, but also really beyond, and that would have some overlap into what the Federation is trying to do. And so to be able to be a link between the rabbis and people who are planning programs of engagement, that could be kind of the first seeds of people's journey, really interests me. I think I'm a good communicator. I'm good at thinking about education and programs kind of from beginning to end, the experience that people have. And so that excites me, trying to bridge these two roles and see how they can inform each other.
Fantastic. All right, I'm going to turn to the others on the call. Are there any areas that we have missed at this point that you are more information that you're looking for?
Oh, you're talking to me? I'm sorry.
No.
Oh.
I was asking everyone else first. Yeah, and I saw no. I've heard no responses, which is.
It's a brief. You opened by introducing yourself as a conservative Jew who's a Reform rabbi. I'm curious if you could just elaborate a little bit on your experiences with Orthodox Jews and Orthodoxy, and your comfort level working with that segment of the Jewish community. And yeah, please.
Sure. I think I could talk at length about the blessings and the gifts of each movement of Judaism and what they offer people in their lives. And I could also be a critic of each movement. I've tried to really live in all of those ways. The year that I spent at Drisha, I really lived as an Orthodox Jew for a year. Part of that was my own questioning of my own observance and my own community, and some struggling that I was doing at HUC. I learned a lot that year. I made some very close friends. I also realized that the Orthodox community was not going to ultimately be my home, but I'm comfortable in that environment. I really, the learning and the teaching that I know is available in the Orthodox community is something that I hope is a model in many ways. And I think Drisha is so exceptional because this amazing Rabbi, David Silber, created this institution for women. So any kind of struggles that I have with Orthodoxy in terms of the role of women, I think Rabbi David Silber is, just the best of the best in terms of opening as many doors as he possibly could. So I can, I davened at the Karl Bach Shul, I davened at KOE, I davened, in Orthodox shuls for a year. And I loved it. I really loved it. So I'll say that. I found my home both in Michigan City in a Reform congregation and at Anshe Emet. I love to pray in Hebrew. That's really important to me. The Reform movement, that's my roots. So the idea of just critical thinking and freedom and modernity and honestly political liberalism is at my core also.
I got to hop off. It was great. Well done.
Thank you.
So thank you for joining us, Michael. The last question I'll ask is for you. Are there things that are important for you to share with us that you haven't had an opportunity to talk about?
I'm going to look at my notes for a minute. I'll just say when I spoke to Rabbi Belinsky about the position, he talked about providing pastoral care to rabbis. And that's something that I think I could be good at. I'm a good listener. And I know rabbis need that, someone to be objective, someone who's not directly in their communities. And that's one other part of the job that I would really welcome. And he talked about welcoming new rabbis to town when they move here. And that just sense of hospitality and of welcoming new rabbis, I think I could do a good job of too.
Great. Well, listen, I want to thank you very much for spending the time this morning. It was a great conversation, and our time frame is we're going to be meeting on Thursday, and so hopefully, let's say by early the following week, I should be able to get back to all of the candidates who have had the Zoom interviews to talk about next steps. So we won't be waiting a long time. We're ready to move on shortly, and I would just again want to thank you for spending the time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon.
You too.
Thanks.
Thank you. Enjoy Florida.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.